Ma'am, this line is for people who actually paid for their seats. Step aside. The words landed loud enough that a dozen heads turned in the boarding queue at Gate C-22, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 6:14 in the morning. The woman he said it to didn't turn red. She didn't raise her voice. She simply lowered the phone in her hand, looked at the badge clipped to his chest, and said nothing at all. That silence would end up costing more than anyone in that terminal could imagine. But to understand how a gray hooded sweatshirt and a scuffed canvas bag brought an entire airline to its knees. You have to go back 40 minutes earlier, before the insult, before the cabin, before a phone call that shut down every fuel truck on the eastern side of the airfield. At 5:32 that morning, Naomi Ellison was already awake, sitting on a metal bench outside Gate C-19, 3 gates down from where she was actually supposed to board. She wasn't lost. She did this every time she flew out of Atlanta. Arrived early enough to walk the concourse before the crowds swallowed it, to watch the ramp crews load baggage under the sodium lights, to listen to the low mechanical hum of an airport that never fully slept. Most people who move through terminals see furniture. Naomi saw a machine with 1,000 moving parts, and she happened to own a controlling share of the company that kept nearly 1/3 of those parts turning. She wore a faded charcoal hoodie with a small hole near the left cuff, jeans gone soft from washing, and a pair of white sneakers that had seen better runways than this one. Slung over her shoulder was a canvas duffel with a strap gone thin and shiny from years of use. Nothing about her said money. Nothing about her said Harlow Meridian Logistics, the ground services conglomerate she had built from a single leased hangar in Memphis into the company that fueled, towed, and gate-managed aircraft for 11 of the largest airlines in the country, including the one she was about to fly. In her jacket pocket, her fingers found a small brass keychain shaped like an old compass, its casing worn smooth at the edges. It had belonged to her father, Walter Ellison, who had spent 31 years working the ramp at this very airport, loading bags in July heat and January sleet, memorizing flight numbers, learning to disappear into a uniform so that nobody complained about him. He died 8 years ago, on a Tuesday, of a heart attack that the family always suspected had as much to do with 3 decades of being talked over as it did with his heart itself. Naomi kept the compass because her father used to say that a compass doesn't care what you're wearing. It only cares which way is true. She had built Harlow Meridian on that idea, quietly without press releases, buying up ground handling contracts one regional airport at a time until the company's name sat on service agreements at O'Hare, at DFW, at JFK, and here in Atlanta, without most passengers ever noticing the small print on the jet bridge that told them who actually kept the lights on. She dressed the way she dressed on flights for a simple reason. She wanted to know, firsthand, on any given Tuesday, what an ordinary person experienced when they walked up to a counter. She had learned more about her own company's failures in a hooded sweatshirt than she ever had in a boardroom. At 5:58, she walked to Gate C-22 and joined the priority lane, badge-side boarding pass already glowing on her phone. Ahead of her, the line for general boarding stretched back through the terminal, tired travelers, shifting bags from shoulder to shoulder. She had exactly one meeting in London, a 9 a.m. sit-down with the leadership of British Regional Air Services, and exactly one goal for the flight: sleep. Derek Mason had worked the gate for Skyline Continental Airways for 6 years, long enough to develop a private system for sorting passengers before they ever reached his counter. He noticed shoes first, then bags, then posture. He had gotten good at it, or so he believed. A woman in a blazer with a rolling Rimowa case got a smile and a welcome aboard, ma'am. A man in a tracksuit with a duffel bag got a flat stare and a request to confirm his boarding group. Derek had never once been corrected on this instinct by a supervisor because his instinct usually agreed with the wealthiest people standing closest to him. And wealthy people rarely complain about being flattered. When Naomi stepped into the priority lane, Derek's eyes moved down from her face to the frayed cuff of her hoodie and stopped there. "Ma'am, this line is for people who actually paid for their seats. Step aside," he said, pitched just loud enough for the businessman behind her, a broad-shouldered man in a charcoal three-piece suit, to hear and nod along. Naomi lowered her phone slightly, offered the kind of patient smile she usually saved for interns who hadn't read the briefing memo, and said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Derek let out a short laugh with no warmth in it. "Right, first class." He looked her over again, lingering on the duffel bag. "We're completely full up front today, ma'am. I don't have time to sort out seat jumpers before an international departure. Zone 4 boards in 20 minutes. You can wait there." Behind her, the man in the charcoal suit, Preston Whitfield, managing partner at Ridgeline Capital Partners, though nobody at that gate knew his name yet, cleared his throat theatrically. "Some of us have a continent to cross today, Derek. Can we move this along?" "Of course, Mr. Whitfield," Derek said, his whole posture folding into a different shape, warm and eager. Then, to Naomi, flatter than before. "Last warning. Step aside." She didn't step aside. She placed her phone screen up on the scanner, chimed a clean, bright note, and the display turned green. "Ellison N, Seat 2A, First Class, Diamond Delight." Derek's expression froze for a fraction of a second before his jaw tightened again. He typed rapidly on his terminal, pulling up the manifest as though the screen might change its mind if he looked hard enough. "System error, I need to see photo ID." Anyone can screenshot a boarding pass. It was against protocol. The scanner had already verified the encrypted code, and she'd cleared security an hour earlier. But Naomi, unwilling to delay her own flight over a fight she didn't need yet, produced her passport without comment. Derek turned it over twice, ran a thumb along the embossed seal, as though searching for a flaw, found none, and shoved it back across the counter without a word of apology. "Go ahead," he said, refusing to meet her eyes, and made no move to say the words every other passenger in that line had heard him say all morning. "Welcome aboard." Naomi took her passport back, held his gaze a half-second longer than was comfortable, and said quietly, "Guest service refreshers are usually worth the hour, Derek." Then she walked down the jet bridge, believing, wrongly, that the worst of her morning was already behind her. The cabin of the Skyline Continental 787 smelled of leather conditioner and the particular cold hush of pressurized air before takeoff. Naomi found 2A, the window seat just behind the bulkhead, and had barely lifted her duffel toward the overhead bin when a hand, sharp, manicured, decisive, slammed the compartment shut in front of her. Vanessa Holt, lead flight attendant, stood, with one hand still braced against the bin and the other resting on her hip, blocking the aisle entirely. Her blonde hair was pulled into a French twist, so severe, it looked as though it might be the thing keeping her composure in place. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Sweetie, these bins are reserved for our first-class guests," she said. "You'll want to check that downstairs or bring it to the main cabin. You're holding up the aisle." "I am a first-class guest," Naomi said evenly. "Seat 2A." Vanessa's eyes flicked to the seat number, then back, unable to hide the flash of disbelief crossing her face. "Let me just see that." She leaned in so close to Naomi's phone screen that Naomi could smell her perfume, as though searching for a watermark that would prove the pass was counterfeit. When she couldn't find one, her tone dropped a register. "We do maintain a dress standard in the premium cabin," she said, "for the atmosphere. Business travelers expect a certain—" She paused, choosing the word with visible relish, "presentation." There was no such policy, and Naomi knew the airline's own passenger conduct rulebook better than Skyline's general counsel did. In part because Harlow Meridian's legal team had helped draft the most recent revision 3 years earlier, during a joint operations review. Unless that changed in the last 10 minutes, Naomi said. The only restrictions are bare feet and offensive language. I'd like to stow my bag. Vanessa stepped aside, rolling her eyes with theatrical slowness as Naomi settled into the wide leather seat and opened her laptop. Preston Whitfield strode into the cabin a minute later, and Vanessa transformed instantly, her rigid posture dissolving into a practiced, welcoming bow. Mr. Whitfield. Champagne before we push back. You read my mind, Vanessa. He dropped into 2B, directly across the aisle, and as he settled, his eyes crossed to Naomi and curled with open distaste. He leaned toward the aisle, pitching his voice for the whole hushed cabin. Vanessa, are we running a charity flight this morning? I pay $11,000 for peace and quiet, not to sit across from someone who looks like she wandered in from a shelter. Vanessa actually laughed, a short, delighted sound. I completely understand, sir. There's been a ticketing mix-up at the gate. I'll see what I can do to make the rest of your flight more comfortable. Naomi kept typing, giving no sign she'd heard a word. She had spent her whole career learning that men like Whitfield and women like Vanessa fed on visible anger, and that the fastest way to end a performance was to refuse to be the audience. She preferred to let people build their own gallows, one plank at a time, and simply wait for the trapdoor. 10 minutes before departure, Vanessa moved down the aisle with a tray of pre-flight drinks, serving Whitfield, then the passengers in 3A and 3B, walking straight past Naomi without pausing. Excuse me, Naomi said, pleasant and clear. I'll take a sparkling water. Vanessa turned slowly. We're actually out of clean glassware for pre-departure. I can bring you a plastic cup once we've reached altitude. It was a small, deliberate cruelty, the kind designed to be too petty to fight over, and it was only the first tier of what was coming. Vanessa disappeared into the galley and returned 2 minutes later, wearing an entirely different face, rigid with manufactured authority. Her voice pitched to fill the whole first-class cabin like a public announcement. Ma'am, I need you to gather your belongings, she said. We have a situation. Naomi looked up. Excuse me? A married couple with diamond status has been separated by a system error. They need to sit together. We're moving you to 41E in the main cabin to accommodate them. We'll refund the fare, of course. There was no couple standing in the aisle. There was only Preston Whitfield, smirking behind his champagne flute, like a man enjoying courtside seats. I'm not moving, Naomi said, quiet but immovable. I booked this seat 90 days ago. If a couple needs to sit together, ask for a volunteer or let them sit apart for 6 hours. Vanessa's practiced smile vanished completely. This isn't a request. It's a crew directive. Refuse a direct instruction from a flight attendant, and you're in violation of federal aviation regulations. Pick up your bag, or we will have a very serious problem. The whole cabin had gone silent. Newspapers lowered, drinks paused mid-sip, every eye locked on the unfolding scene. Whitfield sat back, visibly delighted. Naomi closed her laptop with a soft, deliberate click, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something colder and far more precise. I'd choose my next sentence very carefully. Vanessa, she said, reading the name tag pinned above the woman's heart. Right now you are lying to a paying passenger, attempting to fraudulently downgrade a confirmed fare, and threatening a federal violation to cover your own bias. I am not moving to 41E. Vanessa's face flushed a deep, furious red. She was used to passengers folding the instant federal regulations were invoked. She was not used to being challenged, least of all by someone she'd already decided didn't belong in this cabin at all. Fine, she snapped and spun toward the galley intercom, snatching up the heavy red handset that connected directly to the flight deck. The cockpit door clicked open a moment later, and Captain Russell Briggs stepped out. Broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, a man who had commanded runways and cabins for 22 years and had never once, in that time, been questioned by anyone he outranked. He walked the aisle with Vanessa trailing behind him like a witness eager to testify. "What's the problem here?" Briggs said, looking down at Naomi. He did not ask what happened. His tone had already convicted her. "Captain, this passenger is refusing crew instructions and became hostile when I tried to resolve a seating conflict," Vanessa said quickly, arms crossed, eyes wide with performed distress. "I don't feel safe completing my duties with her up here." Whitfield nodded along eagerly. "It's true, Captain. She's been a nuisance since the gate. Some of us shouldn't have to tolerate this kind of aggression." Naomi looked from one face to the next. The unholy triangle of entitlement, bias, and unearned authority, and felt something cold rise in her chest that she kept entirely off her face. "Captain," she said evenly, "your flight attendant is lying. Ask her to produce this separated couple. There isn't one. She's trying to downgrade me because Mr. Whitfield doesn't care for my sweatshirt. Check the manifest. I'm Diamond Elite." Briggs didn't so much as glance at his tablet. He had already looked at the hoodie, at the duffel bag, at the woman herself, and made up his mind before she finished her sentence. "Ma'am, I don't care what status you claim to have," he said, leaning in close enough to make the threat physical. "My flight attendants run this cabin. If Vanessa says you're disruptive, you're disruptive. You have two options. Walk yourself back to 41E right now, or I call security and have you removed, and I will personally see to it that you never fly this airline again." The threat hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. A forced removal would mean uniformed officers marching her down the jet bridge in front of 200 strangers with their phones already out. It would mean a missed meeting in London, a viral clip with her face in it, exactly the kind of spectacle she had spent her whole career avoiding. "You are about to make a mistake you cannot walk back from, Captain," Naomi said softly. "I'd suggest you step into that cockpit and call your operations center before you do anything else." Briggs laughed, a short, ugly bark with no humor in it. "I don't need to call anybody to deal with an unruly passenger. I am the highest authority on this aircraft. Are you moving, or am I calling the police?" "Call them," Naomi said. Briggs blinked, caught off guard by the calm, and then furious at being caught off guard. He grabbed the radio off his belt. "Gate agent, this is Captain Briggs. Level 2 disruption in first class, passenger non-compliant. Send Atlanta PD and airport security to the aircraft. We need a physical extraction." "Copy that, Captain." Derek Mason's voice crackled back, unmistakably pleased with himself. Vanessa smirked. Whitfield lifted his champagne in a small, silent toast. And in seat 3C, a young man in his 20s named Marcus Doyle. No relation to the officer who would arrive 12 minutes later. Though the coincidence would be noted by exactly no one, quietly angled his phone toward the aisle and pressed record, his thumb trembling slightly, torn between the urge to speak up and the fear of becoming the next target if he did. He said nothing. He simply watched and kept recording, telling himself that a recording was better than nothing, even as some part of him suspected it was mostly a way to avoid the harder thing. Naomi didn't look at any of them. She reached into her jacket pocket, closed her fingers briefly around the small brass compass, and pulled out her phone instead. She bypassed the standard network and opened an encrypted line, dialing a single number from memory. It rang twice. "Victor," she said, calm enough that her voice barely carried past the first row, though every passenger in that cabin was straining to hear it. "It's Naomi. I'm on Skyline Flight 714 at Gate C22, Atlanta. The crew is attempting to have me removed and blacklisted over what looks a great deal like racial profiling, and the captain has just called airport police for a physical extraction. Hundreds of miles away in a glass-walled operations center in Memphis, Victor Reyes, Chief Operating Officer of Harlow Meridian Logistics, sat forward so fast his chair nearly tipped. "Say the word, Naomi. Pull every ground contract we hold with Skyline Continental at Hartsfield-Jackson," she said, her eyes fixed on Captain Briggs. Fuel, tow, gate leasing, ramp staffing, all of it. Suspend it now. There was a half-second of stunned silence on the line. Naomi, that grounds their entire eastern hub within the hour. That's the idea, Victor. Her voice didn't rise. Do it. And get me the FAA's Southern Regional Office on a second line. I want to report a captain abusing federal authority to cover a discrimination complaint. She lowered the phone and looked up at Captain Briggs, whose confident sneer was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to falter under the sheer specificity of what he'd just heard. You wanted to show me who has authority on this aircraft, she said quietly. Let's find out how much authority you have without fuel, without a tug to push you back, and without a gate to return to. Briggs stared at her for 3 long seconds and then broke into a loud, patronizing laugh that bounced flatly off the curved ceiling. Harlow Meridian, he scoffed, unclipping his radio again. Cute trick, lady. Playing pretend CDO on a cell phone isn't going to save you from a federal offense. You're delusional. Vanessa exhaled with theatrical relief, arms folded. She's been inventing rules and throwing a tantrum since boarding, Captain. I've genuinely never seen anything like it. Just get her off the plane, Whitfield said, swirling the last of his champagne. The rest of us paid for exclusivity, not front-row seats to a breakdown. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy thud of boots came down the jet bridge. 2 Atlanta PD officers stepped through the forward door. One of them, a broad-shouldered veteran named Officer Marcus Doyle, who scanned the cabin, on the way a man scans a room he's walked into 100 times before, and paused, just slightly, at what he saw. Briggs pointed a thick finger at Naomi, seat 2A, refused a direct relocation order, became hostile, and is now threatening the airline. Remove her, cuff her if she resists. Doyle studied the scene for a moment longer than Briggs expected. The calm woman with her hands folded in her lap, the flushed, red-faced fury of the crew standing over her. In 17 years on this beat, he had responded to dozens of onboard disturbances, and disruptive passengers were reliably screaming, crying, or swinging at someone. This woman looked like she was waiting for a delayed train. Ma'am, Doyle said anyway, because a directive was a directive, I need you to gather your things and come with us. Officer, I'd strongly advise you wait exactly 60 seconds before you put a hand on me, Naomi said without heat. You're being used to cover up a civil rights violation, and everything you're about to do is being recorded. She pretended to call someone and shut down the airport. Vanessa cut in, shrill and delighted. She's clearly unstable. Just get her off. Naomi turned her head, unhurried, and looked out through the thick oval window at the tarmac. A sprawling, constant ballet of fuel trucks, baggage tugs, and blinking marshalling wands that had run without interruption for as long as this airport had existed. 5 seconds, she said softly, almost to herself, her breath fogging the glass. Outside, the 12-ton pushback tug clamped to the nose gear let out a long mechanical whine, sputtered and died. Its yellow beacon lights went dark. A ramp worker halfway through loading a cart of luggage simply set the bag down on the tarmac, pulled off his ear protection, and walked away from the open cargo hold. Across the terminal windows, gate after gate went still in a slow, spreading wave. Fuel hoses stopped pumping, jet bridges froze mid-extension, marshalling wands lowered and switched off. Skyline, Continental's entire Atlanta hub, the busiest domestic operation the airline ran, simply stopped breathing. Inside the cabin, the auxiliary power cut out a heartbeat later. The lights dimmed to the dull amber of emergency backup. The hum of the air vents died. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke, and the silence had a weight to it that pressed against every ear in that cabin. Captain Briggs stumbled forward, grabbing the bulkhead as the sudden loss of stable power threw his balance off. What the hell was that? He barked, all his bravado gone thin. Before anyone could answer, the heavy red emergency phone in the galley began to scream. Not the soft chime of a flight attendant call, but the harsh mechanical override tone reserved for the control tower. Briggs lunged for it. "Flight deck, Briggs. We just lost ground power, and the tug disconnected. What's going on out there?" The voice on the other end belonged to the airport's chief ground controller, and it sounded like a man watching his entire shift catch fire. "Captain, hold your position. Do not attempt engine start. Harlow Meridian just executed an emergency suspension of every ground services contract. Skyline holds at this airport fuel, tow, gate leasing, all of it. Nothing belonging to your airline is moving on this field. They've locked us out completely." The blood drained from Briggs' face so fast he had to grip the counter to stay upright. He turned, slow and stiff, and found Naomi's eyes across the dim cabin. "I told you," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the silence. "You should have checked the manifest before you picked up that radio." Officer Doyle, sensing the ground shift beneath everyone in that cabin, quietly lowered the handcuffs he'd half drawn. "Captain," he said carefully, stepping back out of the aisle, "do you still want this passenger removed?" Briggs couldn't answer. His mouth opened and closed, with no sound behind it, the full weight of what he'd done finally landing on him. He hadn't just insulted a difficult passenger. He had ordered the arrest of the woman whose company owned the ground his aircraft was parked on. Vanessa, still oblivious to the disaster unfolding beyond the window, threw up her hands. "Why is everyone just standing there?" "Arrest her. She clearly hacked something. This is a federal offense." "Shut up, Vanessa," Briggs snapped, his voice cracking, and for the first time all morning, the flight attendant flinched. He took a trembling step toward seat 2A. "Miss Ellison, I didn't know. The system just said Diamond Elite. Didn't flag you as someone who mattered." Naomi finished for him, her voice flat and cold. "That's exactly the problem, Captain. You shouldn't need a warning light on a screen to treat a person with basic decency. You looked at my sweatshirt, you looked at my skin, and you decided I was disposable before I said a single word to you." Across the aisle, Preston Whitfield had stopped smirking entirely. He was scrolling frantically on his phone, trying to load a business news feed to confirm what he was hearing. When it finally loaded, Harlow Meridian Health's all-ground opus for Skyline Continental at Atlanta Hub, his jaw went slack. "Ellison," he muttered, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Harlow Meridian Ellison. You're Naomi Ellison." "I am," she said. I owe you an apology," he stammered, all his earlier bravado gone. "I'm Preston Whitfield, managing partner at Ridgeline Capital. We submitted a $340 million proposal to your board 2 weeks ago for the freight logistics contract. I'm sure we can put this misunderstanding behind us." "Dinner in London, my treat." "There will be no dinner, Mr. Whitfield," Naomi said, quiet and final. "When I evaluate a partner, I look at the character of the people running it. You sat in first class this morning demanding that a woman you'd decided was beneath you be removed from your sight. That tells me everything I need to know about how you'd treat the people who load your freight at 3 in the morning. Consider the proposal dead." Whitfield sank back into his seat as though struck, staring at his champagne flute like it had personally betrayed him. A sharp ringtone cut through the cabin before anyone else could speak. Briggs's personal cell phone, buried in his breast pocket. The caller ID glowed. "Gregory Hale, CEO, Esquire Continental." Briggs stared at it like it might detonate, then answered with a shaking hand. "Mr. Hale, sir, I can explain." The voice on the other end was so loud that Officer Doyle, standing 3 feet away, could hear every word. "There is nothing to explain. My entire Atlanta hub is dead. I've got 22 aircraft holding on the ramp with nowhere to push back because you decided to arrest the CEO of the company that runs my ground operations. Are you out of your mind?" "Sir," Vanessa told me she was being hostile. "I don't care. If she was reciting the Declaration of Independence, put Ms. Ellison on this phone right now, or I will personally see to it You never fly a Skyline aircraft again. Briggs held the phone out to her with a trembling hand. She didn't take it. She simply reached over and tapped the speaker icon on the screen herself. "Good morning, Gregory," she said, her voice steady. The CEO's tone flipped instantly from fury to something closer to panic. "Naomi, my God, I am so sorry. This is not who we are as a company. Please, I'm asking you directly, lift the lockout. We are losing money by the second, and the FAA is already calling my office." "We can fix this, Gregory," Naomi said. "But it's going to cost a great deal more than a fruit basket. Name it." She looked around the cabin slowly, at Briggs, pale and shaking, at Vanessa, tears now genuinely welling in her eyes, though it was hard to say whether it was shame or the sudden understanding of what she'd just lost. First, Captain Briggs and Vanessa Holt are terminated, effective the moment this aircraft reaches the gate. They walk off in front of the passengers they humiliated me in front of. "Done," Hale said instantly. Second, Derek Mason, the gate agent who refused to board me after my pass had already cleared, is fired before I set foot back in that terminal. Consider it done. Third, Skyline funds an independent outside audit of every crew training program you run, specifically on bias and passenger profiling, conducted by a firm I approve. And you fund a $5 million scholarship in my father's name, Walter Ellison, for young people from ramp and ground crew families who want to become pilots. There was a pause on the line, brief but real. $5 million was a serious number. Grounding an international hub for another hour was a far more serious one. "We'll have the paperwork moving within the day," Hale said, quietly. "You have my word. See that I do," Naomi said, and ended the call. She dialed Victor back. "Release the lockout. Let them fly." Within 30 seconds, the low hum of the auxiliary power unit roared back to life. The cabin lights flickered up out of their amber dimness, and outside the window, the tug's beacon began blinking again as its diesel engine caught. The airport exhaled. Captain Briggs and Vanessa Holt stood frozen in the aisle, stripped in the space of 11 minutes of everything that had made them feel untouchable an hour earlier. Officer Doyle gestured toward the open cabin door, not unkindly. "You heard the lady," he said. "You two need to come with us." As they were walked off the aircraft, past the very passengers they had tried so hard to impress that morning, Naomi opened her laptop again, adjusted the frayed cuff of her hoodie, and quietly went back to her spreadsheets. She didn't look at Whitfield, who sat staring out the window in silence for the rest of the flight, watching the internal messages from his partners pile up on his phone, each one asking what had happened to the Harlow Meridian deal. 25 minutes later, a fresh crew came sprinting up the jet bridge, pulled from the emergency reserve pool on direct orders from the CEO's office. Captain Elena Cho, a 20-year veteran with silver at her temples, walked straight to seat 2A, removed her hat, and held it at her side. "Miss Ellison," she said, "on behalf of Skyline Continental, I want to personally apologize for what happened this morning. We are fueled, cleared, and ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Captain," Naomi said, and meant it. "Let's get to London." A young flight attendant named Priya Anand appeared a moment later with a crystal glass of sparkling water on a linen napkin, the exact drink Vanessa had refused her 2 hours earlier. "For you, Miss Ellison," she said warmly. "Anything at all, just press the call button." It was, by every account afterward, the quietest and most carefully respectful transatlantic flight Skyline Continental had ever operated. By the time the aircraft touched down at Heathrow, 9 hours later, the world outside the cabin had already caught fire. Several passengers in the general boarding line at Gate C-22 had filmed Derek Mason's treatment of Naomi that morning, and Marcus Doyle in Seat 3C had quietly uploaded his recording of the confrontation with the caption, "Watch what happens at 6 minutes in." By the time Naomi's phone had cell service again over the Irish coast, the clip had 11 million views, and the phrase "Skyline grounded" was the top trending topic in the country. Vanessa Holt attempted a television appearance 2 days later, on a morning program hosted by a sharp-eyed journalist named Renata Cole, wearing a modest cardigan and squeezing out a few careful tears. "I was just doing my job," she said. "I thought I was protecting a distressed family. This billionaire ruined my career over a misunderstanding." Midway through the live broadcast, Renata's producer fed a note directly into her earpiece. Harlow Meridian's legal team had just released the Gates time-stamped manifest, proving no separated couple had ever existed on that flight, along with the security footage of Vanessa physically blocking Naomi from the overhead bin before a single word had passed between them. Renata read the manifest aloud, on air, and watched Vanessa's face go white before she tore off her microphone and walked off set. The clip outperformed the original by nightfall. Vanessa was permanently blacklisted by the flight attendants' union within the week. Captain Briggs faced a harsher reckoning. The Federal Aviation Administration opened a formal inquiry into ordering a physical extraction of a fully compliant, nonviolent passenger, and his commercial license was suspended pending review. He never flew a commercial route again, taking a quiet job flying small unpressurized cargo, runs out of a regional strip in northern Georgia, a daily humbling reminder of the career his own certainty had cost him. 6 weeks into that job, he wrote Naomi a letter by hand, unprompted, admitting plainly that he had looked at her clothes and made a decision about her worth before she'd said a single word, and that no amount of explaining the pressure of the moment changed that fact. He didn't ask for anything in return. He asked only that Harlow Meridian's scholarship program consider, someday, funding a course on bias for captains, because he wished someone had made him sit through one before that morning instead of after it. Derek Mason was fired before his shift even ended, his smirking condescension immortalized in the same viral clip that had made him instantly recognizable and instantly unemployable in the industry. He was last seen working overnight security at a strip mall outside Marietta. Preston Whitfield's fall was the most public of all. The morning after landing, Ridgeline Capital's board convened an emergency meeting in Manhattan after the collapsed Harlow Meridian deal wiped 4% off the firm's valuation overnight. The firm's founding partner played Marcus Doyle's recording for the full boardroom, Whitfield's own voice asking whether they were running a charity flight, and the room sat in disgusted silence. Whitfield was stripped of his title within the hour and escorted out by the same security staff he'd spent a decade ignoring. He sent Naomi a long email a month later, not asking for the contract back, only admitting that he had built an entire life around deciding, at a glance, who deserved his respect and who didn't, and that watching that decision collapse in real time in front of 200 strangers had been the first time anyone had ever made him actually look at it. 6 months later, Jackson looked, on the surface, exactly the same. The same sodium lights over the ramp, the same low hum of engines warming before dawn. But Skyline Continental's new bias and training audit had quietly rewritten every onboarding manual the airline used. And the first cohort of the Walter Ellison Aviation Scholarship, 18 young people, most of them the children of ramp workers and baggage handlers, had just begun ground school training at a flight academy outside the city. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, Naomi Ellison sat on a metal bench at gate C-19 again, in the same gray hoodie, the same worn duffel bag over her shoulder, the small brass compass turning slowly between her fingers. A young ramp worker rolling an empty baggage cart past her paused, recognized her from the news months earlier, and gave her a small, uncertain nod. She nodded back. Nothing more, no speech, no cameras, and went back to watching the fuel trucks move under the lights, the way her father used to, the way she still did every single time she flew. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, standing in a line, watching, saying nothing. That's worth sitting with for a minute. Real dignity rarely announces itself. It just waits to be tested, and it usually is in the smallest, most ordinary rooms: a gate, a cabin, a counter at 6 in the morning. If this story mattered to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that they are never as invisible as someone else's assumptions make them feel.